Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted challenges and questions by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms. Whether you're a seasoned educator or new to the IB world, each biweekly episode and guest aims to equip you with practical tips and positive inspiration, helping you teach with more confidence, creativity, and joy. So whether you're walking your dog or commuting to school, hit play and join a community of educators ready to learn, laugh, and thrive in your IB journey. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of IB Unplugged. Today's episode is super exciting, actually, for any educator. I think if you've gotten into the field of education, you got into this field because you wanted to have a positive impact on the lives of young people, and you want to see them flourish, you want to see them grow to become more of themselves. And I think sometimes in education, we can feel a bit constrained. Sometimes we get sort of caught up in, here's the curriculum, here's the assessment model that I have to fit within. And in many cases, educators, I think we can feel kind of boxed in. And so we're excited about talking with Conrad Hughes today. Conrad is somebody who is really challenging this quite a bit. He's developed what's called the Learner Passport in his school and created a consortium of schools that are essentially building this up together to effectively kind of punch up to universities and say, we want to shift the way that we're being measured right now. We want to shift the way that students are being assessed and what the curriculum looks like and change these things moving forward. So it's pretty exciting stuff. And so we got a lot in it for you. That's going to be quite good, I think. A little bit of background on Conrad. Conrad Hughes is the Director General of the International School of Geneva, the oldest international school in the world. He is also professor in practice at the University of Durham's School of Education. He has been school principal, director of education, international baccalaureate diploma program coordinator, and teacher in schools in Switzerland, France, India, and the Netherlands. Conrad is also a senior fellow at UNESCO's International Bureau of Education, a member of the advisory board for the University of the People, and research assistant at the University of Geneva's Department of Psychology and Education, and teaches theory of knowledge. So we're talking about somebody who has a wide breadth of experience in different educational systems, and that's what made this conversation so interesting, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked... So we started this conversation on reforming assessment, but then as we realized we moved on, we really started focusing on how are we looking at these competencies of students and how are we, yes, right now we do have to also do in the IB's case, these IB exams, but how else can we make sure that there is this comprehensive picture of the student and what they are capable of and where they thrive that isn't going to be shown in just the test scores. So I think the idea of the Learner Passport, which we're going to talk about in this episode, it's a great one of many solutions that you can do to really be able to showcase a student's strengths and really be able to also really highlight these things about the student and really be able to focus on them in your own classroom, but also in the school as a whole.
Yeah. So if you are an educator interested in breaking through the constraints that a curriculum and assessment can sometimes put on you, stay tuned because this episode has a lot of interesting things for you. We hope you enjoy.
Hi, Conrad. Welcome to IB Unplugged. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Courtney.
We want to start off with the same way that we ask each of our episode guests, and we want to get a little bit of background. So if you could kick us off with just explaining why you chose a career in education.
Great question. So I was born in South Africa in the early 1970s, and I hated school. I had a terrible relationship with most of my teachers. I was naughty. I would bunk class. I got punished a lot. And then my life changed when I went to an international school, which was also an anti-apartheid school called Waterford Kamhlaba. It's a great school. It exists today. It's the United World College of Southern Africa, run by a great woman, Jackie. And, in those days, I guess three things happened when I went to that school. The first was there were no uniforms. The second is it was co-educational, so there were boys and girls. And the third is there were children from all over the world, all over Africa. So it's a really huge mind-opening experience. And I think unconsciously, I was drawn to international education at that point. few years later, I had this incredible French teacher. His name was Rolf Huysmans. And he came along teaching French literature. I wasn't doing French literature because my French wasn't very good. But I wanted to be one of his disciples, one of his followers, because there was something of a cult following around him. No, I'm serious. It was a bit like Dead Poets Society. He'd toss his scarf over his shoulder. And he had these piercing blue eyes, and he'd write these French poems about the sound of his teeth sinking into an apple. And
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. He used to take his students off to drink espresso over their literature classes. I mean, who wouldn't want to be part of that? And eventually, I actually managed to get my IB diploma subject package changed. So I dropped a subject I was doing really well in at the higher level and picked up French. And I was warned, you're probably going to fail. But I didn't listen to them, and I went ahead and did it.
You don't understand. There's this guy. I've got to follow him.
Yeah. Anyway, French wound up being the worst subject on my IB diploma in terms of the score. But what he did was he evoked some kind of passion in me for knowledge, for learning, for literature, for French, and that's never left me. Mm-hmm. So if I'm gonna thank anyone for the path that I took to go into education, it would have to be him. Rolf, my ex, my old French teacher. He's no longer with us, but a terrific influence on me.
I love hearing that, great educators are also inspired by great educators. And that's a really powerful message that you've just shared, and I think it's really affirming for any educator out there to recognize we have influence, we have the possibility to inspire young people, just as when you were younger, to recognize there's something powerful here with an education that I can get involved in. So now, thinking about the role of education, our second warm-up question we always like to ask our guests is, how do you see the role of the educator evolving in the coming years?
I mean, to me, it's pretty simple, really. Luc Ferry, who was the Minister of Education in France, he's a friend of mine. He's a fantastic mind. And he comes from the whole lineage of Jules Ferry, who invented national education in France in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. He would always say, and I think he still says it, that there's a difference in French between l'enseignement and l'éducation. So l'enseignement, which is, if you like, pedagogy or sort of instruction, that's what teachers do, mm-hmm. whereas l'éducation is what families do. Mm-hmm. So education, which is moral, which is about your values, about really sort of big picture decision-making elements of our life, that comes from your home values, from your culture, from your family. Whereas in the classroom, you're learning maths, you're learning science. It's very technical. That's the old view. And what we're seeing today, and what we're going to see more and more, I believe, is that teachers have to educate, not just instruct. It's about taking into consideration mental health, values and identity, culture. It's about getting people to learn to live together. It's about considering everything that a student can do, not just their ability to perform well in a highly technical environment. So increasingly holistic and increasingly human and all-encompassing, and therefore, increasingly complex. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. And the other is education used to be about the past, and now increasingly it's about the future. Mm-hmm. So it's all about knowing history, transmission of knowledge, understanding the values of the past, so that young people could be inserted into society, having caught up, if you like, with the ambient knowledge and cultural understanding that was expected of them. Now, and in the future, I think we're going to be more and more challenged, and we already are, to think about preparing young people for known unknowns, for increasingly rapid cycles of disruption, which means that we're shifting from knowledge and content, which you store in your long-term memory, to the ability, the skillfulness with which, and the capability that young people must have in areas of complexity, volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity.
Sounds like you're talking about areas of citizenship, how to be an active citizen and contribute positively to the societies that we might occupy and the dynamic nature of those societies as they shift and being prepared for what that's bringing up.
I think so. Absolutely. These political institutions are to young people, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, which is on its way, not what they were to millennials and older generations because of a shift in the way that knowledge and information is distributed. And also a feeling that, getting out there and making a difference and doing something, it's not necessarily something that you vest in a government or some sort of macroscopic entity that you vote for and they're taking care of it. I think increasingly, we're sort of building into the consciousness of young people, sustainable development goals, global problems, things that we all need to solve ourselves. And of course, in an increasingly mobile environment. So, you're not even sure exactly where you're necessarily going to be doing it. Mm-hmm. I hesitate when I say that because, of course, the majority of the world's population still lives where it was born and where it will die. We mustn't forget that. We mustn't sort of get swept up by a global elite, which is a small percentage that's extremely mobile.
Even in those places, though, the idea of community is still shifting. Even if you never leave your home, it's suddenly children and kind of younger people have these bigger and more global communities virtually, and those are starting to influence them a lot more than previous generations too.
Absolutely. And we also need to give them the confidence, the knowledge and skills to be able to thrive beyond wherever they are, if that's what they want to do.
and to kind of take ownership and responsibility in terms of what they can bring and contribute to their society, to their group as well.
I think this brings us up into a kind of our main topic here in this episode, which is about reforming assessment. And so to kick us off on that, I'd like to invite you up onto a soapbox and be able to explain to us, really set the stage. What are the most important reasons why you believe that assessment needs to be reformed?
What we need for today and tomorrow, it's creativity, it's future fitness, it's innovation, it's intercultural competences, learning to live together. You look at the World Economic Forum's forecast of skills for the future, you get elements like the ones I've just mentioned up there in the top sort of 10 skills needed. And yet, when you look at the end of high school in most schools, what's being tested hasn't really changed all that much since about the 1850s. It's largely knowledge regurgitation. It's the ability to take tests and do well on tests, which is great, but how many tests are you actually going to do in your professional world? The environment that we're living in is about managing projects, interacting with people, and viewing far, thinking out the box. And yet, we've got all these young people cooped up in examination rooms doing multiple choice tests, short item responses, cramming knowledge and getting all stressed about it just before. So that's one problem. It's a lack of curriculum relevance, which is driven by the assessment model, because it's not as if educators and curriculum design teams don't know that we need to be testing new types of knowledge. It's just that the assessment instruments that we've created make it very difficult to do that. That's one problem. There are basically three. The second, it's the narrowing of assessment. So you look in a primary school classroom, kids they're drawing, they're playing music, they're running around outside, they're having fun, they're having naps. The learning is transdisciplinary. They're looking at units of inquiry. They're doing projects. It's great. There's a lot of exploration. And if you look at what their parents are doing with them outside of school, they're often putting them in extra sports and arts classes. And it could also be in their communities that they're having a lot more outdoor experiences. in general, what happens is that broad base of experience gets more and more narrow as we get closer and closer to the end of high school, where we have to focus on certain subjects. And what happens is we start to drop those extracurricular activities that we're doing. High school kids don't go to sports day anymore. They stop being in the school play. They don't have enough time. And basically the curriculum becomes more and more narrow. Okay. And I'm not talking about, A levels being more narrow, for example, or narrower than the baccalaureate. It's the amount of content that needs to be looked at within subjects, and the heaviness of it is such that the psychic energy of young people is focused almost entirely on that. And you get a lot of talent, a lot of gifts that are lost. X could have carried on with the sports that they were so good at as a young child, but they stopped because they have to make choices. Y could have gone on with art and music and theater, but had to make some choices. And guess what? Chose science and maths over that. There's nothing wrong with science and maths, but it's a pity that we narrow things down so much. And then you can get into choice systems, or you can get into curriculum design configurations. It doesn't really matter. What you see is a narrowing in the experience. Mm-hmm. And the last thing, let me just get to the last thing.
Yeah.
It's the high stakes nature of it. And this is maybe the worst bit.
Yeah.
It's become so ultra competitive. There's so much stress. There's so much ego around performance, around getting into the right university, about getting the best score, about being better than others, that it creates teaching to the test, learning to the test, extreme stress, mm-hmm. and also superficial learning, a kind of learning bulimia. So those are the three problems, I'd say. It's the broad-based nature of learning is narrowed. The stakes and the competitivity, or the competitiveness, I should say, is heightened mm-hmm. to an unhealthy degree. And the creativity, the exploration is lost.
Becoming a better IBDP educator is a daily practice informed through reading, research, personal experience, and episodes from IB Unplugged, like the one you are listening to right now. But sometimes the show can go a bit too quickly, or we can simply forget some of the key points once we are out of the car or back from our walk and in the office preparing for our next lesson. That's why it's easy to download the episode summary at cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Simply navigate to today's episode and click Free Summary to receive a condensed summary of today's episode, including links to other sources and other exciting bits of information you can use immediately in your daily practice. It's free and it helps. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I think when you were talking especially about that second point about the narrowing, it also, especially I think in the IB where it is quite competitive, there's also really this push to focus on what they say, what you're good at, or what they expect you to get high scores in. Where I'd imagine, I was thinking about your example where you're saying they told me I was probably going to not do well at French. I could have gotten a higher score if I picked another subject, but then this was ultimately the class that sparked your passion and that you were able to do. I wonder how often and how tricky that is, that trade-off of just because you're not necessarily good at something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. But when you're so focused on assessment, then you're always going to, by default, be kind of pushing these students to do what you expect them to score better on.
Look, it's happening all the time, particularly in language. So, in a bilingual environment, students doing a second language, and after, 3, 4, 5 years, it's pretty good at it. And so they should be doing language A. Mm-hmm. But the chances of them getting a 7 in language A are much lower than them getting a 7 in language B. So the school pushed them into language A, and possibly against their will. Because on the other side, you've got universities saying you need to get a 7. Mm-hmm. You need to get, X score. And that 1 or 2 point difference is going to have a huge effect on the child's future. And so there's a conflict there all of a sudden.
If I heard you correctly, it sounds like the relevance of the assessments that we have now is far removed from what we need to be focusing on for young people. And kind of almost a challenge to the early specialization. Like you mentioned, sort of the narrowing of content and narrowing of what people are going to be focusing on. As a university and careers advisor, I think of this through the lens of, helping people identify what they think they want to do later on in life. And in that respect, I guess I can align with this idea of, we want to help you get toward that specialism and figure out, is this actually what you want to do? Or were you thinking the wrong thing? And do we need to pivot a different direction? But it lends itself to, I know you're about to publish a book here called Changing Assessment, How to Design Curriculum for Human Flourishing. And when we think about the curriculum and specifically what you just pointed to, the narrowing of that curriculum and kind of getting that specialism toward the end of the IBDP and entry into university, we know that curriculum can be designed for many different purposes. And I'd like to, dive in a little bit more to what you're looking at here. What's the thought behind the term human flourishing? Do you see that encompassing that specialization that people might be trying to acquire before university? Or do you see it widening more and kind of, doing the opposite of what you were just mentioning with regard to like narrowing the curriculum and instead expanding that curriculum for people as they get close to, leaving secondary school?
Yeah, look, it's great. It's challenging. It's much easier to point out the problem than to come up with a solution. But
yeah.
Speaking of flourishing, let's just draw an analogy. Okay, so you plant a seed in a pot, and you want there to be lots of soil. You want the soil to be rich. You want the soil to be full of nutrients, to receive water. And as that seed grows into a plant and starts to really reach out and grow its leaves, it needs oxygen, it needs sunlight. And the longer you can keep that healthy ecosystem going, the more resplendent, the more flourishing that tree will become. I think it's kind of the same with human beings, in that if you take an educational experience where a child is receiving a number of different rich interactions, experiences, keeping his or her or their mind open, exploring different avenues. It's stimulating all sorts of new connections, and there's health and joy in that. If you take away all the pressure as well that comes with exams. But what we do is then we kind of uproot that plant and put it in a much smaller pot where, okay, now you need to focus on this. It works for some. It doesn't work for others. And it's those others that I'm kind of interested in. The ones that drop out of school. The ones that say, this isn't for me because the school doesn't see my passion. Or my passion doesn't belong in school. I want to be an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Or I want to be a race car driver or whatever. And school isn't letting me let that talent flourish. So we have to figure out a way of broadening assessment so that those gifts that are growing into talents, those sort of leaves or branches that are really reaching out, that we nourish them and keep them going. Mm-hmm. Whereas what we've done is we're saying, okay, you can only really flourish in maths and history and English, and those are beautiful subjects. But not everybody fits into that. Mm-hmm. What about the guys who don't fit in there? That's the thing that keeps coming back to me after all these years in education and observing human beings, observing so many intelligent people, young and older, who didn't fit into that rigid system of schooling. And so what are we doing about it? That's what's pushing me. And I think this is what I talk about in the book. There is a way of broadening assessment so that we can get closer to that vision of flourishing.
So, talk me through, it's not necessarily an abolishing of assessment, it's an evolution of assessment. And are you thinking of this more in, now it's about assessing more of those skills and competencies rather than, is it like the medium of assessment? What are kind of the most important changes that you think need to happen? Yeah,
great question. You kind of said it already. You use this word competence. So, we talk about 21st century skills. I'm not so keen on skills, whether they're soft skills or hard skills, because a skill is technical aptitude. What we're looking at in a competence, it's a unity of skill, of knowledge, and of attitude. Your knowledge is your CV, it's your experience, it's your degrees, diplomas, your qualifications. Your skill is, okay, how well you can use this program or work with that tool or do such and such a thing. Whereas the attitude, it's showing up on time, it's working in a team, it's being a follower, a leader, it's being empathetic, it's knowing how to listen, to work with people, and the list goes on. The three need to come together. And once you start thinking that way, you kind of redefine what it is we're aiming for. So it's not, history, English, geography, physics, maths, and then on the side, athletics, music, visual arts, and then at home, passion project, YouTubing, DJing. You think about all of those things and you say, what are the competences that they are evoking? Is it possible that the student who's good at maths and the student who is setting up a business, that they're actually exemplifying the same kind of competence? There might be more emphasis on the skill in one area and a bit more emphasis on the attitude in the other. Is it possible that a student who's passionate about the environment and is working on environmental custodianship, and then a student who's very good at geography, that they're actually exploring a similar competence? Is it possible that a student who's chosen a number of subjects, maybe extra subjects, and a student who is involved in some kind of highly creative entrepreneurial project, that they're actually exemplifying the same competence? Once you start thinking that way, then you're assessing these clusters of skill, attitude, and knowledge, academic and non-academic. And you wind up with this new vision where the educated person might have got their diploma through one of many different pathways. So we've come up with 7. This is actually the work with UNESCO. Some flagship papers done in 2017. It's really very powerful because there are a lot of different skills matrices and competence frameworks out there. But I think this, to me and to the people I've worked with, is the most compelling and enduring one. It's lifelong learning to learn and living to learn throughout your life, which we know is needed. Self-agency, so that's autonomy, entrepreneurship, standing on your own 2 feet, critical thinking, having an opinion, balancing rights and responsibilities, and all of the ethical kind of responsibility that goes with that. Different types of interaction. There's a lot of interactions, interacting with the environment, the world, interacting with tools and resources, and that's now become obviously artificial intelligence and rapidly evolving tools, and interacting with other people. Okay, social skills, people skills, if you like. It's more than a skill, but that's the shorthand. And transdisciplinarity, so areas of learning where you're transferring across domains. And the last one is literacies, multiliterateness, so health literacy, cultural literacy, financial literacy, scientific literacy, numeracy. And what we've done is we've said within these 7 areas, you can identify just about all the activities that a student's involved in and award them for the progress they're making. So what you get at the end, and this is where it really becomes very powerful, I feel, it's a representation of each student that is more or less weighted to a different competence. But there are no winners or losers, because some have got more of this and some have got more of that, but we're not all trying to do the same thing. Because when you put people in an environment where they have to compete against one another and you're taking the top 5%, the top 10%, as opposed to saying, okay, we're really looking for people who are, lifelong learners, or here we're really looking for people who can transfer knowledge. It's a little bit like that cartoon that you must have seen where there's a tree and there's a seal and an elephant and a monkey and I think a goldfish, and the judge says, right, climb up that tree. So you're getting rid of that issue. And you're also starting to mitigate some of the competitive sort of one-upmanship, zero-sum game mentality that's infected assessment so much over the years. It's not perfect, but we've been working on this at my school for about 5 years now. And It's changing the game.
And this is the learner passport.
This is the learner passport. And in my book, I talk about it at the end. It's not the only alternative transcript. There are quite a few out there, which I think is good as well. It's good that there's a multiplicity of different attempts to capture student competences, because what that's saying is that they're more grounded and situated in specific contexts. Mm-hmm. And that's also important. This whole one-size-fits-all thing, it's very industrial. It's part of the problem. But ours, the one we've developed at Ecoland, is the learner passport.
So what does the learner passport actually look like, or what's the story that's told in that? So let's say, what would your learner passport look like?
Okay, so it's a donut. Uh-huh. We started with a radial graph, but because everyone's got such a deficit mindset in education, they started looking at the troughs instead of the spikes. So it's like, oh, there's not much of that. There's not enough of this. So he's not doing well there. Mm-hmm. Just forget about this peaks and troughs thing. And let's have a donut. So there's a circle, and then you've got bands which show the amount of learning and flourishing that's taken place in each of those 7 areas. And those 7 areas have been populated by data over 4 years that is celebrating students' academic achievements, extracurricular achievements, home achievements. So the university admissions officer or the employer gets this, technology-backed donut. There's more detail underneath it. You can find out more about how each of these competences was put together. And each one will be different. I don't have a passport. Maybe we should do one for ourselves, actually. But I guess, I think I'd have quite a lot of lifelong learning, because I'm someone who's, it's something that motivates me, and I like kind of, taking on new challenges, doing new courses, creating things. It's very much part of my DNA. So I'd imagine if it were valid, that's what would show up. Mm-hmm. And probably quite a lot of interacting with others. Of course, it's a bit skewed if you're doing it with adults. It's not to say you can't do it with adults, because it's kind of reflecting our work, mm-hmm. which dominates a lot of our time. Yeah. Whereas with young people, the whole idea is it's reflecting what's already there, which is the course that they have to do. But we're bringing in some of the things that they've chosen and that they're exploring. And we wanted them to keep exploring and keep choosing these things. And that the dream is that, that the kids I was talking about earlier who stopped doing, ballet or art or pottery or whatever it was, jiu-jitsu, because they had to prepare for the exams. Now they've continued with that because, in fact, they'll get some kind of credit for it in the end. And they'll be considered as educated as others.
So now, help me understand, does this go parallel or alongside IB diploma program stuff as well? Or do you see, is this kind of separate? First off, I guess.
Whenever you're looking at sort of curriculum reform within a school, which is in the form of a framework or some kind of movement within a framework, you have to do everything you can to make it substitutive and to make it integrative and not additive. Otherwise, you're punishing the students. You're saying, okay, I'm going to make you do more work, right? Because we think this is important, and they hate it. And in fact, if you look at the way students respond to the IB, and I love the IB, don't get me wrong, but some of the things that have been put in place, they don't like it because it's a huge amount of extra work, and they don't see the meaning in it, the sense in it. Mm-hmm. Just sort of uploading, internal assessments and going through planning and progress forms and reflections is a lot of work, and you have to do it like for every single subject and everything. So what we did was we had this vision of the passport, and we worked with the IB quite early on to see how we could integrate, and they let us do CAS through the passport.
Okay.
So every student does CAS through the passport, and I'm grateful to Ollie Pekka and his team for allowing us to do that. The IB has partnered with a number of schools on not only school-based syllabuses, but innovative projects, so that you're kind of still getting the IB diploma, but you're doing it through the passport. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not 100% there because there is a bit of lifting that has to happen, discussions with mentors, checking in on your competence descriptions to make sure that they're valid. The next chapter of the passport is to use technology to make that as seamless and as almost automatic as possible.
Today's Cog Tip is from Claudia Gonima from Colegio Colombo Británico. Claudia's tip is to use Cognity's reading assignments and reflection questions before class to help students engage with complex topics at their own pace. Having students read and reflect in advance allows our class discussions to be much richer and more dynamic as they come in with questions, ideas, and a stronger grasp of the material. She also finds Cognity to be incredibly student-friendly and easy to use, which has encouraged independent learning in her classroom. Thanks, Claudia.
Now, I don't mean to get too far into the technical bits here, but just in terms of, so if I'm a student going through this, just make sure I understand it, they'll get a report whenever reports are coming, and that's that report on the passport. So it's their competencies in those 7 areas you described. And they would also do this alongside preparing, as you said, IAs and uploading coursework and that sort of thing for the IB Diploma program. So am I understanding this correctly, that throughout the program, they'll get that learner passport constantly sort of updating and the donut kind of shifting and changing as they develop those competencies, and then all the while they are still now preparing for final examinations and all the parts of the IB Diploma program?
That's exactly it. And it starts before the IB. But the subjects you're doing and the grades you're getting in those subjects, that goes into the passport automatically.
Okay.
We put some we basically put some development over it so that happens automatically. Mm-hmm. Everything you're doing for CAS comes through the passport. And then the things that you're doing that might not be in CAS because you started before the IB Diploma, or they don't sort of fit the criteria for CAS. If you choose to put them in your passport, they'll be there too.
There's a bit of element of choice here in terms of what students might want to include in their passport.
Exactly. There is that choice. There is some agency. The mentor is needed as a kind of coach to check in on the validity of the passport competencies.
Okay.
We try not to use the word credits because credit has a very specific
connotation with it.
So that's how it works. So basically, if I'm a student, my last 4 years of school, the discussions I'm having with my mentor will be about the passport, how's the passport stacking up? And at the end of school, I get the passport. And we've seen a number of universities show real interest in the passport. So our guidance counselors helped us develop it. And if universities know about the passport and they're interested in it, we send it in there with the IB Diploma or with the predicted grades.
Nice.
And it enhances the application.
Yeah, I mean, like, as I'm hearing you describe this, I'm seeing something that is very much informed both quantitatively, as you mentioned, with IB scores and that sort of thing, and qualitatively. And when I think of all the letters of recommendation and whatnot that I'm writing for universities, for students as they apply, I'm thinking this passport kind of tells a lot of that story because it sounds like it's got evidence. It sounds like it's got the qualitative as well as the quantitative. It's going through the different competencies. And in many ways, it sounds like it's describing for universities or future employers all the specific things that they may need to know that a university guidance counselor like myself may successfully touch on or may actually miss when I'm writing that letter of recommendation as well. So it sounds like it's actually a really powerful tool to help describe an individual as they're leaving the school.
Exactly. That's exactly it. It's synthetic. You can see a lot quickly. Mm-hmm. And things like running after students to know what to put in recommendation letters, I mean, that's kind of over because they've already built up this portfolio and you can see that much more.
All right. I'm getting sold on the idea. I like it. But talk to me about some of the counter arguments or some of the kind of, for lack of a better term, the naysayers. Like, how did this progress and what were some of the harder sort of obstacles to overcome in developing the learner passport?
Sure. And, this kind of moves back to the book and some of the historical and science of assessment driven reasons why we have the model that we do today. Because it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater or just think that, you can invent things off the bat. And there are problems. So, in assessment, you've basically got two very important constructs. They're not the only ones, but they're important. It's reliability and validity.
Right.
So reliability is if I were to run this test over and over again in different circumstances, maybe with different cohorts, would I get a similar kind of band of results? Is the test something that is fair and can be administered in different contexts, or is it sort of, do I get my students' essays and just throw them down the stairs, and the ones that land at the bottom get a 7 and the one that land at the top get a 1, and every time I do this...
You're telling me that's not how we're supposed to grade it? That's how I grade them.
I'm sure. But, there's a huge emphasis on this. And then there's validity, which is, am I testing what I'm meant to be testing? Mm-hmm. So if I want to see how well you can run the 100 meters, I don't ask you to do a science experiment. And if I want to see how well you understand photosynthesis, I don't ask you to play the guitar, right? Now, the needle of assessment tends to go in one direction or the other because, unfortunately, there's some tension between them. So if I really want a test to be reliable, I'm going to make it as objective as possible. And if it's objective, it means the things that I'm testing need to be assessed as objectively as possible, which means that point of view, creativity, different perspectives kind of flies out the window. And you wind up with these very limited knowledge regurgitation type tests.
Multiple choice.
Multiple choice is a typical example. That's really driven the assessment model because assessment's highly politicized because it's so high stakes, and questions of fairness come first. There's a lot riding on it. There's a lot of money behind it. People are expecting results to reflect performance, and if they don't, there's a problem, understandably. But that's killed off some of the validity. And so as we move, further and further into the 21st century, and we know that these competences for now and for tomorrow are needed, there's some efforts to weave them into assessments, but they're pretty weak, to be honest. Now, the passport is very valid because we're going straight to, maybe not perfect, but we think a strong match of the competence, the attitude, all the things that we see happening and how it's reflected. So, that so much creativity went into this. I really want that to come out. There was so much passion and investment and focus here. I want that to come out. The way that you were just collaborating with people was exceptional. I want that to come out. Where we lose a little bit is on the side of reliability, because one passport's different to the next, because some students, not some, all students are given some kind of agency in choosing some of the topics that go in there. It's not always that easy to report accurately on what's happened. It's a little bit like a personal statement. You're a guidance counselor. So if, I want to get into university and I give you my personal statement and I say, I've done this and I've done that. Some of it you can't check up on. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like a CV. So one of our challenges is to try and bring as much reliability into the passport design as possible. And, we've got the coach or the mentor vetting it. We've already got this algorithm that converts grades straight into a passport sort of coefficient. So that's okay. But around the more attitudinal constructs, that's a challenge. And all alternative assessments face that. Mm-hmm. Where we're strong, I think, is in validity. So that's a challenge. And another one of the sort of criticisms that you can get of all alternative assessments, it's the predictability of it, or its predictive value. So, okay, well, you say this passport is telling us that the student's a lifelong learner, but how do we actually know that? Mm-hmm. So if I see on the donut that there's this much lifelong learning, how do I know that that's really the case later on? Are they actually going to become a lifelong learner? Is it really telling me at university that they're going to be lapping up all these courses? Whereas if you've got this straight line from high school up to university, basically, of courses, even though high school courses become more complex in university because you've got more transdisciplinary and sort of, subject branches, there's still more of a predictive element. So you can say, okay, you've done really well in science. You've got 7s in physics, chem, and maths. You want to do engineering. I can see that link. Whereas at the passport, if a student's got a huge amount of, interacting with the world, how do we know in which university funnel they're going to perform? So obviously there's some questions there. I mean,
okay. Yeah, so it kind of leaves itself open for some growth still, and trying to, as you say, like understanding the reliability, the validity of it, and really backing up, I guess, the evidence that sort of supports where somebody is and the knowledge that what this passport is suggesting is going to be reliable years to come as well.
You know, in the book, I talk about the origin of the timetable. It's one of the earlier chapters. So in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Harvard University was getting students who'd come through different types of schools, and some had studied 120 hours, others had studied for 20 hours. Courses were different, and they were trying to decide who should get in and who shouldn't, and they found it increasingly difficult. And so they had to standardize things. So the president of the college worked with the Carnegie Foundation to come up with something called the Carnegie Unit, which is 120 hours of study is required for you to have credit to get into this university. Mm-hmm. And the university admissions teams and professors, they didn't like this because they weren't used to it. And so they had to threaten them with not paying them their pension for them to agree to this. They forced it in, this Carnegie unit. And once they did that, the universities, they said, we're not going to let you in if you haven't done 120 hours per course. Mm-hmm. All of the high schools started changing. And then if you take that 120 hours, and then you think of the number of subjects you tend to do in a standard curriculum, that can change a bit, but let's say an American or European style curriculum. And then you think of the number of working weeks in the year, the number of working hours in a day, taking outside of that break, lunch. You come up with the fact that timetables are pretty similar across different countries, so that they're something in the region of 4 blocks of 45 minutes per subject, and then you'll have whatever it is, sort of 30, maybe 36 hours in a week. So that creates this checkerboard. That's another type of reliability. So we know that everybody's getting a similar type of experience.
Right.
But straight away, you're starting to kill that whole primary kind of project-based accordion model where I can go deeper here. I can slow things down. I can speed them up. And it's become an enemy of learning. As one of my references, David Perkins from Harvard, actually says, or maybe it was Howard Gardner. I think it's Howard Gardner. He says, curriculum coverage is the enemy of learning.
Right.
So I'm a teacher. I've got this timetable, and I've got the bells that are about to go off, and all these exams, and I've got the whiteboards. I'm just teaching the curriculum. I look over there, and I'm like, who are they? Oh, they're the students. And that one's failing, and that one's doing really well, and that one could actually be accelerated because he already knows everything. But I've got to get through the curriculum, and then it's like, oh, they haven't finished the curriculum, we haven't finished the course, we're not prepared for the exams. Like, who's we? Each person's different. So I'm trying to think about how we can break that down and pace the learning differently, and I think the passport allows that too. If in our mindset we can say it's okay for people to look different when they leave high school, we're not robots. And we're not in the 19th century anymore. We're in a very different world. That was an industrial revolution model. And that's why when we keep talking about the industrial model of education, it runs deep, all the way into the way we've structured schools. Yeah. Architecturally, in fact, not just in terms of timetable.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then if I think about the IB specifically, if we're talking about at your school how you have the learner passport, but then the students are still taking the IB exams. And I think that in some ways, when you were describing the areas of the passport, really easy to see the bridges to components of the IB. I mean, the lifelong learners, the theoretical components line up. But then at the end of the day, you still have students taking high stress, high pressure, very demanding exams. And I'm just wondering your thoughts of from what it seems like, you understand the it's a necessary evil right now, or maybe that's a stretch calling it an evil, but to have these high stakes, high pressure exams, but then we don't necessarily have a way of getting rid of them completely. Like, how have you been able to balance between those two?
No, you're so right to point that out. if we go back historically to the origin of the IB, when it was kickstarted, the first cohorts, they had to do the whole IB diploma alongside what was effectively advanced placement at the time. Mm-hmm. So they had to do 2 diplomas because the IB wasn't really recognized. Mm-hmm. And this is the price you pay for reform. The reason why there's so little reform in education is because you're trying to fix a plane while it's in the air. There's so much pressure, and you don't want to start adding things. And especially you don't want to start experimenting because you've got parents who can, what are you doing? And you're like, mm-hmm. my kid's a guinea pig and what have you, And so the result is nothing changes, which is why it's been so change resistant. When every other industry is being morphed, hugely by technology, education isn't really. I mean, apart from things like access to word processors and whiteboards in the classroom, but it's been pretty slow coming. So this is a challenge. What we want is as many schools across the world to be involved in this kind of work as possible, and that's why we've created this coalition. It's called a Coalition to Honor All Learning. We've got 50 schools involved. Some are doing the Global Citizenship Diploma. Some are doing the Mastery Transcript Consortium. Some are doing Holo Tracker, which comes out of Singapore. So we're doing the Passport. You've got quite a few different models that are being looked at. The UWCs have also been piloting some interesting experiments. Mm-hmm. Not experiments, but sort of visions. And we're kind of putting pressure on the system from below because we want it to change and for there to be more openness. So eventually it would be substitutive. So, maybe you don't need to do the IB diploma. You don't need to do A-levels. You don't need to do AP. In fact, you could be in a very low resource environment where you couldn't afford access to those curriculum boards. But you're so good at all these other things that, we think you're educated enough to have this diploma. It'd be great if that could come from the universities, top down, forced down the way the Carnegie model was. But those days are over. There's so many universities out there. And so difficult for universities just to talk to themselves. The Bologna reform, which was about basically allowing for trans-university credit recognition in Europe, that took forever. And I've gone to university deans, the presidents, and we've tried to get, the top people in universities involved. It's too complicated and too political because universities also have to recognize established examination boards. So what we're doing is from the bottom, we're educating universities through admissions officers, person by person. And the more universities show interest, the more we know we can send those passports to them. And if more schools do that and join this coalition or other coalitions, it doesn't have to be ours. CIS is doing something as well. Mm-hmm. Doesn't really matter. But if we can kind of influence the model from the ground up, because we can see that there's all this human talent that needs to be assessed differently, then maybe the university system will change. But until we get there, we're in these pretty difficult situations where you have to look at ways of making it ergonomic, substitutive, and integrative, which is why the IB is great because they show some flexibility and they're allowing schools to sort of explore different ways of getting IB diploma credit. I think that's super, and I really hope they keep doing that.
It sounds very exciting, and it sounds, like if you're in a school that's doing these things, or if you're part of those 50 schools you mentioned in that coalition, I like the idea of sort of the grassroots. Let's put pressure from below as we kind of move forward into universities themselves. If you're a teacher listening to this right now and you're not in one of those particular schools, are there any particular things or are there sort of like top tips that you might give to those teachers? What would you recommend to a teacher who feels like, okay, I can't actually change the system. I'm in a school that's kind of locked in. They're not really moving into this coalition like you've described. We're not able to do a passport of this nature. We're kind of forced on exams as they are. What would you recommend to that particular teacher so they might have a more profound impact on their teaching and learning in their classrooms right now?
Right at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about inspiration. Inspiration came up, and human beings tend to get inspired by other human beings. So I would encourage anyone who likes this idea to join the coalition. You can Google it, the Coalition to Honor All Learning. You'll find it quickly. And we have meetings. In fact, we've got our first conference tomorrow, live conference here at the International School of Geneva. Wow. Yeah, and it's live streamed as well. But we meet online several times a year. And what you do when you get in that cluster of like-minded educators is you just see what people are doing around the world. Every time someone else presents, every time we meet, and it's I think that'll give you ideas. Then if you're a teacher and you're teaching whatever it is, A-level, AP, Bac Français, Maturité,
IB.
The IB, the matric, whatever, and you're kind of stuck in that space, talk a little bit to your administration and to your leadership and say, like, why don't we create something that is expressing what we think is important as a school? Are we just another school following someone else's curriculum? Or are we actually going to ensure that when students leave, there's some kind of special stamp around what they're doing? There are all sorts of ways of doing it. I mean, this is slightly different, but, we're a big school. We've got 3 different IB centers. And we managed to get everybody on board to teach the same theory of knowledge unit on indigenous societies. And that's part of a broader vision on global citizenship education, where in year 6, all the students across the different schools are doing philosophy for children. In year 9, they're all doing sustainable development. In year 10, they're all studying the history of Switzerland. But it's always in a subject, so in French or in mentor class or in the end of the PYP. And then in year 12, we took the IB diploma students and some students who aren't doing the IB diploma and got them to all share this theory of knowledge band on indigenous societies, because we thought as a school we wanted our graduates to all have had that experience. The reason why I'm telling you that is it's not about reforming assessment necessarily, but at least shaping the student experience and elements of assessment as they exist in more creative ways. I just think it's important that we look at society, at the world, at the way it's changing, and you think, someone has to kind of change the system up there, but who's that going to be and when's that going to happen? Mm-hmm. So we need to do what we can using our future fitness, our creative thinking, to make the student experience more dynamic and exciting and valid. The passport's quite a kind of strong expression, and we've worked on it hard. Mm-hmm. But there are other ways of getting there. I just encourage educators to take that mindset. And you can read my book when it comes out. It's open access, no charge. It's coming out via UNESCO. That puts you through the history of assessment, the way it is and why it is the way it is, and some sort of ideas for exploration and breaking the checkerboard. I call it a checkerboard because it's so deterministic. You have to actually break the thing.
I like that because it's very encouraging for, I think, most people who get into education. The idea is you want to have a positive and profound impact on young people's lives. And I think what you've been describing throughout this entire episode right now are the ways in which we can think critically about, are we actually achieving that? And are we able to achieve that? Even if we might feel some constraints, there are ways in which we can think creatively about the way we are inspiring the next generation of people. So this conversation here has been good for that. It's been a good reminder that you may feel like there's a little bit of constraint placed upon you, but every educator has the capacity to reconnect with that ability to inspire and to challenge the way that things are going, to make sure that, just as you said, am I just following somebody else's curriculum model that they've thrown here, or am I doing things that are relevant to this particular space and this particular time and the students that are here in this space that defines our culture. So that's been a nice way to look at it. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, a great guest speaker comes in, someone who's going to speak to the students' hearts, who's got an incredible story to tell, but they're all sitting in chemistry and in whatever it is in maths. One educator or teacher will say, no, they can't miss this class because it goes towards the exam. The other will say, this is a once in a lifetime experience. Get them out of class. Yeah, you'll lose a bit of contact time. You'll find a way of making it up. Get them in front of this because this is important. So it's thinking that way as well. What are we really trying to achieve here?
Yeah, and if we reconnect with what's our main aim, then ultimately I think we end up teaching with a little bit more joy, a little bit more inspiration, a little bit more vigor as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this episode. I've really enjoyed it. I love a lot of the ideas of the learning passport and thinking about this is all why most teachers are teaching. It's not because they love covering a curriculum, right? It's not because they love exam prep. It's also, I think, maybe a secondary effect of the learner passport is reminding the teachers also about why they're teaching and being able to think about their students in a more holistic way also. So I think it benefits the students, of course, but I do think that there's probably a benefit to the teachers as well.
No, I love what you just said. It is possible when you're teaching the end of high school to do more than just teach past papers, examination schemes, mock exams. Now, we do all of that. And in fact, you can get a lot out of that. But long term, this reform, I think, will release teacher creativity as much as student creativity.
Yeah. So
many great things we could be doing, following, the students and where we see them developing, instead of being stuck in this on this checkerboard. So that's where we're trying to go to. More creativity for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Very exciting stuff. Conrad, thank you so much for taking the time in today's episode and for sharing all these good insights with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. I enjoyed the conversation.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.